You might be trying. You might be seeking to improve. You might be learning more. But as long as you keep thinking the same way, nothing changes. And that's hard to accept. Because it feels like you're doing something. It feels like you're moving forward. But in reality, you're just moving within the same place. Andrew Carnegie used to say that wealth doesn't begin with money. It begins with thought. And not just any thought, but a specific type. A mental pattern. Because that pattern defines everything else. Your decisions. Your actions. Your results. Now think about this honestly. If you keep thinking exactly the way you think today, where will you be a year from now? Probably in the same place. Maybe a little better. Maybe a little worse. But not transformed. And this happens because most people try to change their lives without changing the way they think. They want new results with old patterns. And that simply doesn't work. Because thought is the point of origin. Everything begins there. Before action, there is a decision. Before the decision, there is an interpretation. And that interpretation comes from your mental pattern. Now here's the problem. You don't notice this pattern because it's automatic. It's been running for years, and anything repeated for a long time feels like truth. But it's not truth. It's habit. And habits can be questioned, but only if you are willing to see them. Because as long as you don't question, you repeat. And as long as you repeat, nothing changes. Now observe this. Every time an opportunity appears, what comes first in your mind? Is it curiosity or fear? Is it possibility or problem? Is it progress or risk? Because that first reaction reveals much more than you realize. It shows the pattern that is active, and that pattern determines what you do next. If you see risk first, you pull back. If you see problems first, you freeze. If you see difficulty first, you delay. And then you lose timing. You lose momentum. You lose the opportunity. But you don't even notice, because your mind justifies it. It creates a logical explanation. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't safe. It wasn't worth the risk. And that sounds smart. But many times, it's just the same pattern keeping you in the same place. Now let me show you something important. People who prosper don't think without fear. They think despite fear. They also see risk. They also see difficulty. But they don't stop there. They continue. They move forward. They act even without guarantees. And that creates a huge difference over time. Because while one person is waiting, the other is accumulating experience. While one is analyzing, the other is testing. While one is doubting, the other is learning. And in the end, the one who learns faster grows faster. Now there's a detail that changes everything. You don't need to eliminate limiting thoughts. You need to stop obeying them. Because those thoughts will appear. They are part of your conditioning. But you don't have to follow all of them. You can question them. You can choose differently. And that starts with something simple. Awareness. Noticing when the pattern shows up. Noticing when doubt appears. Noticing when justification arises. Because the moment you notice, you create space. And in that space, there is choice. Now, without awareness, there is no choice. Only repetition. And repetition maintains the pattern. Now let me give you a clear example. You think, what if it goes wrong? That thought appears automatically. But you can stop there. Or you can continue. You can ask, what if it works? What if this teaches me something important? What if this is exactly what I need to move forward? Do you see? The thought doesn't have to disappear, but it can be redirected. And that begins to change how you act. Now, this doesn't happen once. It happens many times, every day. And it is this repetition that builds a new pattern, a stronger pattern, more conscious, more aligned with growth. But there's a critical point here. If you only change your thinking, but don't change your action, Nothing truly changes, because real change comes from the combination thought plus decision plus action, all three together. If one is missing, the cycle doesn't close. And without closing the cycle, there is no transformation. Now think about this honestly. How many times have you changed your thinking for a few days, but kept acting the same? And because of that, you went back to the same place. That happens because your body follows the old pattern. And it only changes when you begin to act differently, even without motivation, even without confidence, even without certainty. And that is uncomfortable. But it is necessary, because growth doesn't happen inside comfort. It happens in expansion, in trying, in failing, in adjusting, and most importantly, in repetition. Now, there is a question you need to start asking yourself, always, before making any decision. Does this choice keep me where I am or move me forward? Simple, but powerful, because it forces you out of autopilot. It forces you to think consciously, and that, repeated many times, starts to change everything. Now, don't expect immediate change. It doesn't come like that. It comes gradually, but it comes for real. And when it comes, it's solid, because it was built. Now, if you keep thinking the same way, justifying the same things, delaying the same decisions, the result cannot be different. It is already programmed. But the moment you start thinking differently, even if just a little, and especially acting differently, even with fear, something begins to change. And that change is the beginning of everything. Because in the end, it's not the world that needs to change. It's your pattern. And when the pattern changes, the results follow. Always. And this is exactly the point where many people get stuck again. Because up to here, everything makes sense. You understand the pattern. You recognize the mistake. You see where you're limiting yourself. But when it's time to act, you go back to the same behavior. And it's not a lack of will. It's the power of habit. Because for years, you reinforced this same pattern. You thought the same way. You decided the same way. You acted the same way. And now your brain tries to pull you back. Always. To what is familiar. To what is predictable. To what is safe. Even if it's not taking you anywhere. Now pay attention to this. There is a difference between knowing and sustaining. Knowing is easy. Sustaining is hard. Because sustaining requires repetition. And repetition requires discipline. And discipline requires choice. Every single day. Even when you don't feel like it. Even when you're not motivated. Even when no one is watching. This is where the game changes. Because most people depend on motivation. But those who grow depend on pattern. And patterns are built through repetition, not emotion. Now let me show you a silent mistake that keeps many people stuck. They wait to feel something before acting. They wait for confidence. They wait for clarity. They wait for motivation. But those things don't come before action. They come after. Always. So when you wait, you delay. And when you delay, you reinforce the old pattern. Now imagine the opposite. You don't wait. You act. Even with doubt. Even with fear. Even without certainty. What happens? You create evidence. And evidence builds confidence. And confidence makes the next action easier. And that becomes a cycle. A cycle of growth. Now compare that to the old cycle. Doubt, waiting, inaction, frustration, more doubt. Do you see? One pulls you up. The other keeps you stuck. And both start at the same point. A thought. But they develop in completely different ways. Now there's something even more important. You don't need to change everything. You need to change enough to get out of inertia. Because the biggest problem is not making mistakes. It's not moving. Movement creates adjustment. Adjustment creates evolution. And evolution creates results. Without movement, None of that exists. So forget perfection. Forget the perfect plan. Forget the ideal moment. Focus on starting. Focus on doing. Focus on moving forward, even if it's small, but consistent. Now, there's a detail that separates those who start from those who continue. Commitment. Because starting is easy, sustaining is rare. And it's in sustaining that the pattern truly changes. Not on the first day, not on the first action, but in continuity. When you do it again, and again, and again, even when you don't see results, even when it feels like it's not working, even when doubt shows up, that's where you build something real. Now let me be direct with you. If you stop every time you don't feel like it, you will never get anywhere. If you only act when you feel motivated, you will act very little. If you depend on emotion, you will be inconsistent. And inconsistency builds nothing. Now, consistency builds everything. Because it accumulates. It adds up. It creates compound effect. Small actions, repeated, generate big results. But this requires patience. And patience requires vision. You need to see beyond the present moment. You need to understand that what you do today is not just about today. It's about who you are becoming. And that changes how you act. Because when you understand this, you stop chasing immediate results and start building inevitable results. Now think about this. If you repeat the right action every day for long enough, the result is not optional. It happens. It's only a matter of time. But most people quit before that because they don't see it quickly, because they don't feel immediate change, because they return to the old pattern. And that's why so few people move forward. Not because they can't, but because they don't sustain. Now, there is a question that can help you stay on track. Every time you think about stopping, ask, if I continue like this for 1 year, where will this take me? And answer honestly, because that question takes you out of the moment and puts you into direction. And direction is more important than speed. Always. Now, if the direction is wrong, it doesn't matter how fast you go. You won't get where you want. But if the direction is right, even slowly, you will get there. So focus on this. Direction, consistency, action. Not perfect, but real. Now, in the end, everything goes back to the beginning. The pattern. As long as you think the same way, you will decide the same way. As long as you decide the same way, you will act the same way. And as long as you act the same way, the result will be the same. But the moment you interrupt this, even in a small decision, even in a single action, you change your trajectory. And trajectory defines destination. So don't underestimate the small. Don't underestimate the simple. Don't underestimate the beginning. Because that's where everything changes. And the only thing separating you from a different result is not luck, not time, not opportunity. It is the decision to act differently, starting now. And now we reach the part that truly defines everything. Because up to this point, you already understand. You've recognized the pattern. You've identified where you're getting stuck. You've seen what needs to change. But understanding doesn't transform. Decision does. And it's not a big decision. It's not the kind of decision you announce. It's a silent decision. Internal. The kind no one sees. But one that completely changes how you act. Because in the end, real change doesn't happen when you feel ready. It happens when you decide to act even when you're not. Now let me show you something few people talk about. You don't need to believe in yourself to start. You just need to trust the process. Because if you wait until you fully trust yourself, you'll never begin. But if you begin, confidence comes, and that changes everything. Because it removes the pressure of needing to be perfect and puts the focus on what truly matters, taking action. Now pay attention to this. There is an exact point where your life changes direction. And that point is not when you learn something new. It's not when you feel motivated. It's not when everything makes sense. It's when you act differently for the first time. It may seem small. It may seem simple. But that's where the trajectory changes. Because until that moment, you were repeating. From that moment on, you begin to build. Now think about this honestly. How many times have you had that moment, but let it pass? How many times did you almost start, but pull back? How many times did you feel you should act, but chose to wait? Those moments are decisive, and ignoring them is choosing to stay in the same place. Now, there is a way to make this simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You don't need to change your entire life today. You need to do one single thing differently. One, but for real. Something you've been avoiding. Something you've been postponing. Something, would make a difference. And you do it today. Without waiting. Without negotiating with your mind. Without internal debate. You decide and execute. Because the more you think, the stronger the old pattern becomes. And the more you act, the stronger the new pattern becomes. Simple as that. Now a thought may come, but what if it doesn't work? And the answer is simple. It doesn't matter. Because the goal right now is not to get it right. It's to break the pattern. It's to interrupt the cycle. It's to prove to yourself that you can act. And that alone changes everything. Because from that moment on, you stop being someone who only thinks and become someone who does. And that creates identity. And identity sustains behavior. Now, there is an important detail. You don't need to do something huge. In fact, the simpler, the better. Because what matters is not the size of the action. It's the fact that it is different, real, conscious, and most importantly, executed. Now let me give you an example. If you've been postponing starting something, you don't need to finish today, but you can start today. If you've been avoiding a decision, you don't need to solve everything now, but you can take the first step. If you've been hiding, you don't need to change completely, but you can show up a little. Do you see? Movement. Always movement. Because movement breaks patterns. Now, from this first movement, everything begins to change. Not magically, but inevitably. Because you enter a new cycle. Action, learning, adjustment, evolution. And that, repeated, transforms your reality. But everything starts with a single decision. No, not later. Not tomorrow. No, because the scarcity pattern lives in postponement, in later, in someday. And the more you feed that, the stronger it becomes. But when you cut it off with immediate action, you weaken it, and you begin to take control. And that is what changes your life. It's not knowing more. It's not waiting more. It's not planning more. It's acting differently. Now let me be direct with you. If you finish reading this and do nothing different, everything stays the same. But if you take one single thing and act, even if it's small, even if it's imperfect, even if it's uncertain, you are no longer the same person. And that is powerful, because from that moment on, you don't return to the same level of unconsciousness. You begin to see, to notice, to choose, and that creates freedom. Now the final question is not about what you understood. It's about what you will do. Because in the end, your life doesn't change when you learn something new. It changes when you act on what you've learned. And that moment is now. And if you've truly made it this far, not just reading, but understanding, then you've already realized something most people ignore. The most important moment is not when you finish listening. It's what comes immediately after. Because that's where the pattern tries to return. That's where the mind kicks in and starts negotiating. I'll do it later. Let me think about it more. I'll start tomorrow. Do you see? The pattern doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't block you in an obvious way. It convinces you, subtly. And if you're not aware, you fall back again. into the same cycle, the same repetition, the same place. Now pay attention to this. There is a window, small, quick, but extremely powerful, between the moment you decide to act and the moment you start overthinking. That window is everything, because if you act within it, you break the pattern. But if you let it pass, the pattern takes control. And the more times this happens, the stronger it becomes. Now think about this in practical terms. You just had several insights, several realizations, several uncomfortable truths. But if you don't act now, this becomes just another piece of content, another idea, another intention. And intention, without action, changes nothing. So here's something direct, simple, but decisive. Choose one thing, just one, something you know you should do, something you've been avoiding, something that could change your direction. And do it now, not later, not when everything is finished. No, even if it's just a first step, even if it's small, but do it, because size doesn't matter. Timing matters, decision matters, execution matters. Now let me show you what's going to happen. Your mind will try to stop you. It will bring doubt. It will bring discomfort. It will try to pull you back. And that's normal. That means you are leaving the old pattern. And every time you leave, there is resistance. But resistance is not a sign of error. It's a sign of change. So don't interpret discomfort as a problem. Interpret it as progress. Because that's exactly where you are growing. Now, if you continue, even with that discomfort, something shifts. You begin to realize that you don't need to be ready. You don't need to be confident. You don't need to feel secure. You just need to act. And that removes a huge weight because it simplifies everything. Now it's no longer about waiting. It's about doing. Now it's no longer about feeling. It's about deciding. Now it's no longer about overthinking. It's about executing. And when that becomes your pattern, your life changes because you stop being someone who reacts and become someone who builds. Now imagine this compounded. One day you act. The next day you act again. Then again and again. Not perfectly, but consistently. What happens? You gain momentum. You gain clarity. You gain confidence. And most importantly, you gain results. Because results are a consequence. Always. They are never the beginning. They are the effect. And the effect comes from the cause. And the cause is your action. Now, there is something you need to understand once and for all. You won't wake up one day different. You won't suddenly become another person. You become different through small decisions, repeated every day. And that builds a new identity, a new way of thinking, a new way of acting, and consequently, a new life. Now look back for a second, not at your entire life, but at your patterns. How many times have you stayed in the almost started, almost decided, almost tried, and almost is the most dangerous place there is, because it gives you the feeling of progress without real progress. It keeps you busy without moving you forward. It deceives you. Now you have two options. Stay in almost or step into now. And the difference between the two is action. Simple as that. Now don't wait to feel like it. Don't wait to be sure. Don't wait to be ready. Those things come after. Always, what comes first is the decision. And the decision is yours right now. So don't overcomplicate it. Don't create more theory. Don't turn this into just another piece of content. Turn it into action. Because that's what separates those who change from those who only understand. And in the end, it's not about how much you know. It's about how much you execute. And from this moment on, that is entirely in your hands.